Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 11th of March 2025. And of course, there's a big meeting going on at the moment, or two sets of meetings really. One between the US and Ukraine in Jeddah, and when Zelensky went to meet the Saudi representatives yesterday, actually, again, a warm hug there that we often see from Zelensky when he meets others. Not so warm with, interestingly, Americans. I've not seen him do that with people like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, but he certainly does that with Keir Starmer the other day and Emmanuel Macron, and here the Saudi leader, or Saudi, I don't know who that is, a representative. But they are meeting today in Jeddah, and also we have this big meeting in Paris, some attending virtually, others there in person. Military officials from more than 30 nations will take part in a meeting in Paris on the creation of an international security force for Ukraine, according to the Associated Press, citing a French military official. There are some claims that the Americans were uninvited, or maybe they just weren't invited. Maybe this is not relevant for them. But I'm fairly sure that 6 months ago, like I said in my previous video, 6 months ago, you wouldn't have been having this meeting because this is a reaction to, I think, American decoupling from Europe, from Ukraine, and essentially changing sides. But also, the US would have been involved in all such meetings, really. Essentially, it will be a meeting of the coalition of able and willing to join efforts to protect Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. The French-British plan envisages the deployment of heavy weapons and the creation of ammunition depots that can be used quickly in the event of a new Russian attack. The talks in Paris will be behind closed doors, according to AP, and the details of the project remain classified. The talks' second part will include more precise and concrete discussions where the participants will be invited to say whether and how their militaries might be able to contribute, the official said. It's not, this is what we need, the official said. It's more, what are you bringing to the pot? The official stressed that the ultimate decision on whether nations take part in the force would be taken at a political level by government leaders. The talks will also be attended by the chiefs of staff of Ireland and Cyprus, as well as a representative of Austria, which are non-NATO countries but members of the EU. Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea will follow the talks remotely. So there's a number of different nations involved there, not just European ones. Now, protests, annoyingly, have erupted in downtown Bucharest following the Central Electoral Bureau's decision to ban Russian-backed far-right politician Călin Georgescu from running in the upcoming rerun of the presidential elections. And they have stated, the far right said that they're still aiming to win. It's all pretty scary in Romania at the moment, I have to say. Despite Russian-backed Georgescu barred from the presidential race, Romania's far right still aim to win, say Kyiv Independent. I don't know what their polling is, but it looks fairly ominous there, doesn't it, in Romania with those sorts of protests. The decision was inevitable for the health of democracy, but this democracy will need deep repairs after elections in May, says journalist Magda Gradinaru to the Kyiv Independent. Romania's secret services failed in the final goal of preventing this crisis, and they will need to be reformed as well, she added. It's to be seen who will capitalise on Georgescu's electoral ban and to what extent social tensions can morph into violent social movements. This was a short-term solution, but the extremist populist platform remains, as does Russian pressure, social resentment and tension. So this may just be the beginning of a crisis that Romania will have to manage in a complicated geopolitical context, she added. The leader of the far-right Alliance for the Union of Romanians, AUR party, George Simeon, said on Sunday evening that those who organised the coup should be skinned alive in the public square. Ouch. He called on people to take part in protests in support of Georgescu. Gee whiz. On Monday morning, Simeon claimed the words were a metaphor, and he asked supporters to protest peacefully. Georgescu appeared publicly holding hands with Simeon and Anna Maria Gavrila, the leader of another Romanian far-right project, Party of Young People, or POT. Georgescu was expelled from the AUR in 2022 after being briefly investigated for declarations in support of Romania's World War II fascist leaders. Now, Georgescu relies on AUR and POT for support. In December presidential parliamentary elections, AUR secured second place with 18% of the vote, while POT gained 6.5%. Both remained in opposition. If Simeon runs for president, some of the tension created by Georgescu's ban will be eliminated, analyst Oana Popescu-Zamfir told the Kiev Independent. According to her, Simeon's recent radical statements are meant to incentivize Georgescu's supporters to vote for him. It's important for Georgescu to explicitly support Simeon, Zamfir said. Other candidates Georgescu's electorate may vote for, according to Zamfir, include former Prime Minister Victor Ponta, former acting presidents Crin Antonescu, or businessman and politician Gigi Becali. If Simeon does not run, whoever wins the election will have less legitimacy, Popescu Zamfir said. So, the Russians are heavily involved, and you might just, although it's right to get rid of Georgescu, you're going to have someone that is going to just take his place, and that there will be extra resentment, if you like, even though it was the right thing to do. It's just one of these really difficult situations where, dodgy things were found. Georgescu was involved. According to law enforcement, Georgescu used over €1 million of undeclared funds and has been involved in neo-legionarism, a Romanian neo-fascist movement that draws its ideology from the country's Iron Guard militant group active in the run-up to World War II. He's denied any wrongdoing, but on the same day, Romanian police found dozens of guns, grenades, 25 kilograms of gold, $3.3 million, 700,000 Romanian leu in cash in the homes of Potra and his associates, so one of his henchmen. These people are the visible tip of the iceberg, is the claim. We'll have to see what happens there. Keep a close eye on that. But as the article ends here, the swift action on Georgescu and his associates showed them that the Romanian authorities were eager to fight back, and they do have a bit of fight in them. So as I said, we'll see how that turns out. Now, Radu Hosu casts his opinion on what's going on. So, what's really happened in Romania, says the political analyst. I, along with others, have to answer this question because our institutions are severely deficient in communication, leaving Romania trapped between Elon Musk's fake news and Russian active measures orchestrated by the FSB, or the SVR. The beginning. In October 2024, during the candidate validation process for the Romanian presidential election, the Constitutional Court of Romania, CCR, consider it similar to the US Supreme Court for reference, invalidated the candidacy of Diana Ivanovici Sozoaca. She is a member of the European Parliament, a Putin supporter, a frequent visitor to the Russian embassy in Romania, and leader of a far-right party with fascist-leaning yet paradoxically neo-communist views, anti-Ukraine, and all that comes with it. The CCR ruled that Sozoaca had violated Romanian laws regarding the promotion of anti-Semitism and oppressive criminal regimes. At that time, the far-right in Romania had 3 candidates in the race: George Simeon, who we just heard about, Diana Sozoaca, and Călin Georgescu. They shared similar extremist backgrounds, splitting extremist votes among them. However, after the CCR, an institution widely regarded as overly politicized, disqualified Diana Sozoaca, anti-system pressure intensified. In the election held on November the 24th, Călin Georgescu, virtually unknown to 90% of the Romanian population just days before, won the first round with 21%, followed by Elena Lasconi, the pro-democratic candidate from the USR party, pro-NATO, pro-Ukraine, pro-USA. The candidates representing the ruling parties failed to qualify for the runoff, as did George Simeon, who placed 4th with 13%. Since no one among the general public had even heard of Călin Georgescu, yet he secured 2.1 million physical votes, something was clearly amiss. Civil society demanded the declassification of the CSAT Supreme Council of National Defence meeting convened by then-President Klaus Iohannis. The documents declassified by the President revealed direct and indirect evidence of Russian interference, including illegal support through TikTok for Călin Georgescu, a candidate who, among other bizarre claims, had told voters he had met extraterrestrials. Thus, following the CSAT document disclosures, the CCR, the Supreme Court, tasked with ensuring the fairness of presidential elections and acknowledging the credible evidence of illegal Russian interference affecting the election outcome, annulled the entire election, ordering the government to organise new elections. Now we find ourselves back in the same electoral scenario from October 2024, similar to the Diana Sozoaca's case. However, this time the Central Electoral Bureau, the body responsible for verifying candidates' legality, has, based on the CCR ruling, exercised its authority to invalidate Călin Georgescu's candidacy on substantial grounds. The rationale: we cannot permit the candidacy of an individual who previously caused the annulment of the 2024 elections, committed illegal actions aided by Russia, and falsely declared spending, zero lei during his campaign, a separate legality, and official document forgery. Therefore, this is not about illegality. It's not about dictatorship or tyranny. It's about a decision made by a Central Election Bureau voting 10-4 to reject Kalin Georgescu's candidacy, someone who benefited from Russian support in the first round, who was backed by rogue reservists from our intelligence and security services and Romanian mercenaries in Africa, who were alleged and known connections to Wagner. According to indictments by the anti-mafia and general prosecutor's offices, he allegedly intended to overthrow Romania's constitutional order and the rule of law. Consequently, do yourself a favour and don't listen to Elon Musk, who has no idea about the Romanian judicial and legislative systems, and definitely don't listen to Moscow's propaganda channels or the Trump administration's proxies. Both sides are solely interested in destabilising Romania and the European Union. And just remember that all of the activity at the moment of both Russia and the US, the Trump administration, appear to be in destabilising European unity and doing things to benefit Russia. It's absolutely incredible. So, one to return to. Now, in France, since Donald Trump has made overtures to Moscow and J.D. Vance has proclaimed that free speech is threatened in Europe, the far-right broadcasters and newspapers owned by Vincent Bolloré are backing Vladimir Putin. So there's a French billionaire who has a lot of control. It's rather like Rupert Murdoch in the US. There's rather a lot of control focused or distilled in this one man, and he appears to be backing Vladimir Putin. So there are problems in France with, again, people who are either useful idiots or outright agents, assets for the Kremlin, and for the people who are interested in the destabilization of Europe. On the other hand, there is this idea that what Trump is doing, and by extension Vladimir Putin, that Europeans are coming together. And I talked about this the other day. I said, hey, look, I'm feeling more European than I ever have done, actually. And we had Brexit. So, you know, what's going on here? Financial Times has this this piece that that is titled, Trump is Making Europe Great Again. The US president has provided the biggest stimulus towards European integration since the end of the Cold War. This is by Gideon Rachman. So I'm going to quote from pieces of this. Dramatic swings in European public opinion underpin these developments. A poll last week showed that 78% of the British people regard Trump as a threat to the UK. Some 74% of Germans and 69% of French agree. In another poll, France was rated as a reliable partner by 85% of Germans, and Britain scored 78%, and the US was down at 16%. So in other words, Trump has absolutely harmed the US standing in terms of public perception around the world, or certainly within Europe. Many European leaders agree that Trump's America is now a threat, though few will say it out loud for diplomatic reasons. They are so uncomfortably aware of how the transatlantic alliance, now in its 8th decade, has made them highly dependent on American military support. This is not just a question of money. The really dangerous dependencies are in US technology and weaponry, and I've been trying to communicate some of these issues in my military aid updates, and I'll be doing so again today. And later it says, that was the logic behind last week's decision to allow the European Commission to raise 150 billion euros to spend on the EU defence industry. The new spending is likely to be concentrated on areas where European countries are particularly dependent on America, such as air defence. The issuance of common European debt is not just a way of raising money for defence. It also offers a chance to build up the euro as an alternative to the dollar as a global reserve currency. The capriciousness of the Trump administration means that there is a considerable global appetite for an alternative to US treasuries as a safe asset. The taboo against common European debt is traditionally strong in frugal Germany. It was partially broken during the pandemic. Now it is likely to be swept away. Friedrich Merz, who will be Germany's next chancellor, is also moving to exempt national spending on defence and infrastructure from his country's constitutional limits on deficit spending. His past fiscal prudence means that Germany has much more space to borrow than heavily indebted France or Britain. In other words, because Germany's had these tight rules on borrowing, it hasn't borrowed much, whereas France and Britain, we're up to the hilt in debt. and not that you want to be up to the hilt in debt, but actually Germany has some elbow room to move here because they have relatively little debt compared to these other two nations, and particularly the United States. A form of military Keynesianism could re-stimulate Europe's largest economy. In other words, famous economist Keynes, you can stimulate the economy through spending. You can borrow and spend and borrow. And rather than tightening your belts and going through austerity, what the US at the moment is looking at doing is kind of cutting everything, going down the austerity route, which is what the UK did in 2008 onwards. We had 14 years of austerity, and it didn't end well, really. So there were arguments that was not the correct approach. Maybe it's not to say you shouldn't make sensible cuts here and there, but if you're not going to stimulate an economy by cutting jobs and impinging on people's ability to spend money. It depends what your economic outlook is. But anyway, this kind of approach is arguably going to regenerate momentum in a potentially stagnating European economy. So a form of military Keynesianism could re-stimulate Europe's largest economy, as one leading French businessman put it to me, with more than a touch of ambivalence. It's very clear the Germans can't sell their cars, so they will make tanks. Trump's final favour in Europe is to hasten the post-Brexit rapprochement between the EU and the UK. So Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, the British and French leaders, have worked together closely on Ukraine. They could form a powerful triumvirate with Merz. One mechanism for increasing military spending would be a new European defence fund in which Britain could participate. This would also have the added virtue of giving the UK and the EU a new form of cooperation that avoids reopening the Pandora's box of Brexit. And it's all fascinating stuff. And it finishes, all of the great leaps forward for European unity have been caused by geopolitical shocks. First, the end of the Second World War, then the end of the Cold War. Now, courtesy of Trump, we are looking at the end of the transatlantic alliance. Europe responded with strength and inventiveness to the last two great challenges. It can do so again. So we're living in extraordinary times, to quote, actually, a great album by James. We are all trying very hard, consulting with European intelligence services to see what we can do to make sure that Ukraine is informed in time. European services can do a lot. Together, we will try to make sure that Ukraine is neither blind nor deaf. And that's German intelligence chief Bruno Karl. Good news to hear there. So Germany looking at stepping up in the intelligence domain, as Britain and France certainly have. We are hearing that Russia's Gazprom faces almost $20 billion, faces almost $20 billion in lawsuits from European energy firms. European energy firms have filed lawsuits against Russian energy giant Gazprom, totaling almost $20 billion over gas supply cuts, according to the Moscow Times. And this is good news. It's a way of stopping Gazprom wanting to open up fully to reintegrate into Europe, as it appears the Americans are keen on. It's difficult because the Americans appear to want to reopen up Russia to globalism, whilst at the same time insulting globalism, but also providing Europe with more LNG than it ever has. And of course, if you're going to allow, let's talk about restarting Nord Stream 2, like Americans get involved in that. So those personal, individual Americans might gain millions from this, but America as a whole will struggle. Well, those who are interested in selling more LNG to Europe will obviously not benefit from a reopening of Nord Stream 2. So I think there seems to be a very chaotic approach to getting Russia to reintegrate from the US. And of course, I would not be advocating that at all. They need to understand that if they're going to invade a European country, they should be punished accordingly. Right, we are hearing that Zelensky has apologized to Trump for the Oval Office clash, according to Steve Witkoff. President Zelensky apologized for the heated argument in the White House. And I think he said in a letter, is that right? But Witkoff said that in an interview, as in Zelensky apologized by letter. But we are Also hearing, though, that the US has blocked anti-Russian language again in a G7 communique, according to Reuters. So they're keeping on advocating for Russia. The US is just incredible, absolutely incredible. It's Sky News correspondent in Jeddah is reporting that the US has ruled out Ukraine's return to borders of 2014 or 2022. So that's a real kick in the teeth for Ukraine. Alex Wickham here with an exclusive. This is a couple of hours old now from Bloomberg. Vladimir Putin has made deliberately maximalist demands ahead of negotiations to end the war in Ukraine, which he knows are likely to be unacceptable to Kyiv and Europe, Western security officials told Bloomberg. There is no indication Putin is willing to compromise on any of his goals, and he is ready to continue fighting the war if he does not get what he wants, the people said. The assessments about Putin's intent cast doubt upon whether he is serious about negotiating a realistic, lasting peace settlement with Ukraine. They complicate Trump's efforts to secure a deal and clash with the president's belief that Putin wants peace. Putin has said Ukraine must formally commit to neutrality, abandon any ambition to join NATO, demilitarize and recognize Russian claims to annex territory. Of course, they're not going to do that. Lavrov has ruled out European peacekeepers. There's no sign these maximalist demands have changed. It raises the prospect that Trump would have to agree to all of Putin's terms if he wants a deal, or walk away. Both would risk rupturing relations between the US and Europe and seeing Ukraine fight on without US support. So here's the issue, and I don't know what will happen here, because I can foresee a point where the US will blame Ukraine for not signing up to Russia's demands, even though those demands are absolutely unrealistic. That's so essentially, like, the US has gone in saying, right, we're essentially going to punish either of you if you don't come to the table. But I don't know if that punishment extends to if a deal doesn't get signed. Because if Russia are presenting completely unrealistic things that Ukraine don't sign up to, then it's looking like Ukraine are being intransigent. Whereas actually it's Russia's intransigence in not compromising on any of its maximalist demands. And if Ukraine get the blame for that, which I'm sure the US will be capable of attributing, then we could have some trouble here where Ukraine end up getting absolutely done over by the US because they don't sign up to Russia's demands. Now, it's all going a bit nuts in the US. We've got stock markets having one of the worst one-day losses since the COVID shutdown, losing around $1.7 trillion wiped out in a matter of hours. This is more than 10 times all the US aid for Ukraine, and this money was primarily going to US manufacturing and over the period of 3 years. Tariff wars are pure poison for the economy, says Tendar. They are propelling inflation to new heights and fueling fears of an incoming recession. I think was it JP Morgan that's now said the chance of a US recession have now gone up to 40%. A terrible day for the American economy. But the problem is they're blaming Biden for this. It's like Biden hasn't done trade wars with all his neighbors and potentially with the EU, and then put tariffs on China, which aren't actually very sensible tariffs. There are more. I was listening to one analyst saying, actually, if you really wanted to do decent tariffs on China, you would be doing ones that would support your own agriculture. But actually, that it hasn't looked like they've done even that. So this whole situation is insane. Save $20 billion a year on aid to Ukraine, but wipe out $1.7 trillion in a day. MAGA all the way, baby, says Constantine. And this is an image of what all the major American corporations were looking like yesterday in terms of shares, in terms of stock. So Trump is a wrecking ball. The Russians needed to finally destroy the US, says Jane Kiev. Its trade and defense alliances, giving the enemies of democracy free rein to make territorial gains globally. And no US president has ever destroyed so much US equity value so quickly. And actually, this is pretty bad. So if you look at Trump's first term, Obama's second term, and Biden's term, this is what the score was in the first 200 days. And in the first just over 100 days of Trump's second term, he's tanked the stock market, the S&P 500 there. That is in stark contrast to those other 3 tenures. It's not looking good. As Anthony Scaramucci said, who was once an advisor to Trump, crash the US and Western markets, start a trade war with Western allies and countries on US borders, Mexico and Canada, suggest a military intervention in Greenland and Panama and Canada to acquire land and resources, withdraw military aid from Ukraine and end signals intelligence, wreak havoc in Europe by trying to dismantle the NATO alliance. Next up, revoke Magnitsky Act, revoke Russian sanctions, put US ground troops in Ukraine to support Russia. Are there any American political leaders asking questions of the intent and strategic goals of this administration? Absolutely incredible. But that's well summarized there by Scaramucci. And it appears that the US have resumed corn supplies to Russia. RIA Novosti found this out based on data from American Statistical Service. Just incredible. Like, oh dear. But there is a decent Republican. And in fact, I listened to his whole interview, and I think you should as well. Go and find what Don Bacon says on CNN when he's interviewed. So this is a Republican, big supporter of Ukraine, and he is not happy, and he's publicly saying so.
The Musk Starlink satellite internet system in Ukraine. What did you think about that?
I served in NATO. I worked with Polish officials, Polish military. I've been to Poland twice now. There's very few countries that are more pro-American than Poland. Maybe the Baltics are right in there as well. They want our presence, and they also know that the fall of Ukraine would be devastating to their national security, not only Poland, but the Baltic countries. And I thought, why is a White House official that's not even elected, it's not the president or the vice president, why is that person belittling the Polish foreign minister? It's not appropriate. It's not right. We need more discipline in the White House.
So he's reprimanding Elon Musk here for his spat with, and indeed Marco Rubio spat with Radoslaw Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister. One thing I would say is please go and give Don Bacon some love. Like on Twitter or via email, just show, if you're American particularly, show your support for him. When people do the right things, we need to congratulate them.
Now, Poland's our friend. If you got heartburn with them, get them on the phone and talk to them. But stop the public bashing of our friends in a world that's, where we have real threats out there with China, Russia, and Iran. So I didn't like what I saw. I thought we could be better.
The Musk Star.
Thought we could be better. Absolutely.
I've been to Poland.
And he says it again there. But if you go and listen to that whole interview, it is full of really good stuff there. I might go and find a little bit more, actually. Yeah, here we have it. I kind of want to play you this whole thing, but it would be like 8 minutes long, so I won't. I'll just play you the beginning.
It's a terrible mistake not to have the Ukrainian leader in the talks. We've seen a history of this. I remember when the Trump administration was negotiating with the Taliban without the Afghan government, that really weakened the Afghan government thereafter. And we could go all the way back to 1938 when Neville Chamberlain negotiated with Adolf Hitler, and they carved up the Czechoslovakia territory and basically demanded the Czechoslovakian leader give in to their demands, Hitler's and Chamberlain, the leader of Great Britain at the time. And then a year later, Germany took the rest of Czechoslovakia and invaded Poland. Ukraine is our ally. They want to be part of the West. Russia is our adversary. And it's time that this administration gets this in their brain. They're treating Putin with velvet gloves, and they're being harsh to our allies. And I got to tell you, I'm hearing from all over the world, but particularly lots of Republicans in Omaha who do not like what they see.
So you believe it sounds...
Ouch, that is really, really condemning of the present approach by the Trump administration, and this is coming from a Republican.
Sounds like that the Trump administration is just being too conciliatory towards Russia right now and sort of walking away from its legacy of being the leader of the free world.
We are the leader of the free world, but right now, many countries are questioning, are we still the leader of the free world? We may be the most powerful country in the world. We were the leader of the free world, but it appears to many leaders and people all over, to include Republicans in Nebraska, that this administration is walking away from that legacy that was built by Ike Eisenhower and all these presidents, and really a capstone of Ronald Reagan, peace through strength, and building these close alliances. And we are undermining that legacy right now. I'm not interested in a foreign policy that is totally built on realism or transactionalism, where it's just, what do we have in it for us? I believe in having a foreign policy that's a mix of realism, protecting our country, and idealism, where we're the leaders standing for freedom, free markets, rule of law. And we gotta be clear-eyed, but also have moral clarity. Putin invaded Ukraine. He's murdered all of his political opponents. He tried to kill a previous Ukrainian prime minister.
Yep.
He's bombing cities. He's ramped up the bombing of cities since President Trump has been harsh towards President Zelensky. We got to see this. We're playing into the hands of Putin, and I think it's devastating for our national security and our foreign affairs for the years to come. So I'm very concerned.
He's absolutely on point, and as I say, that's coming from a Republican. So please go and support this guy. Takes, I think, quite a lot of bravery to be so overtly critical. I think that is an overt criticism of Trump. He's being so overtly critical of Trump in the administration's approach to Ukraine and their going soft on Russia, that I'm sure he will be incurring some serious wrath there from his administration's leaders. But really good to hear that finally. We're going to end just for a little short bit on China. So social media discourse is dead, says Astrai Intel. Footage shows a Chinese AI agent managing dozens of social media accounts simultaneously. It is a certainty that authoritarian regimes around the world will abuse this technology to the maximum in order to influence elections in the West. So just get a load of this. This is just 10 seconds. It will loop over. But this is an AI bot essentially managing all of these social media accounts and no doubt liking and writing things in alignment with whatever the algorithm states. This is just one computer doing that. I mean, it's just multiply that by a gazillion, and that's what you've got going on with the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans, all undermining our elections and our democracies worldwide. And as John Favreau from Pod Save America here says, we love free speech at Meta, don't we, folks? Meta being obviously Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. Days after meeting with Meta's China negotiating team, the privacy team was willing to weaken Hong Kong users' rights, according to an email exchange contained in the complaint. Quote, in exchange for the ability to establish operations in China, Facebook will agree to grant the Chinese government access to Chinese users' data, including Hong Kongese users' data. So much for freedom of speech that Mark Zuckerberg keeps kind of talking about. It's like, oh, you're going to allow the Chinese government to have control over that data so they can persecute those in Hong Kong who are wishing to advocate for democracy. Just roll over Zuckerberg and let China and Russia and North Korea and Iran tickle your belly. Right, and we're going to finish on a comment. So thank you from Michael Vujar. Michael Vujar is big on sort of China, particularly from a kind of Canadian viewpoint as well. So I don't think you have it quite right, JP, on who Musk is compromised to. It isn't Russia, it is China. I know you don't cover this, and I have brought up this theme before, but I will connect some dots for you. What Musk is doing is exactly what China wants him to do. Notice the split between the US and Europe. Remember that wolf warrior howling about the US this week in Paris? This aligns with the PLA, so the Chinese doctrine for setting the conditions for the reclamation of Taiwan. PLA doctrine, that's the Liberation Army, states that for an attempt on Taiwan to occur, there must be a fundamental split between America and Europe, free democracies of the world. I understand this as using Ukraine as a sore spot to drive the division further. And this is interesting because if you remember this last week, the Chinese envoy to the EU said how appalling the Americans had been treating the EU and Ukraine. So it does seem like there's some good justification for this in at least what we've seen in the last week. Um, but I So he says, I would understand this as using Ukraine as a sore spot to drive the division further. I remember you acknowledging before that Musk is beholden to China because of the Shanghai factory with no oversight. Well, now what you are seeing is what the cost is. Absolutely. I wouldn't disagree with this at all. I know you covered yesterday the Chinese tariffs on Canada. Well, this is the cost of keeping Tesla out of the market. All Teslas in Canada are made in Shanghai. You know who that Shadow Fleet stuff is for. It aids the Russian nation, yes, but that isn't the goal. This is called cozying up to the theocratic dictator nobody wants to talk about, Modi. So I know that Michael Vujar has a less than favourable view on Narendra Modi in India. Remember that Modi came to the US before everyone except Bibi Netanyahu. I will encourage everyone to watch the presser between Trump and Modi so they understand the scope of the corruption and collusion going on there. Everyone needs to accept if China is a problem, then aiding India is only creating a new China. I know a totally different take. China won't let Ukraine fail because of food and the one China policy. Therefore, the muskrat won't shut off Starlink because it isn't in the interests of the CCP. What I am seeing is America walking blindly into a war that they aren't prepared for and will likely get punished in, as there will be no allies to call on beyond India and maybe Japan. You will have noticed the unwillingness of other G7 members to acknowledge that the great threat is China. You covered it this morning. This is the split. Time will tell, but I do believe Musk is doing the work on behalf of the CCP, and if that coincides with the Russian national interest, well, all the better for the Russian nation. So interesting there. Lots for you to talk about. I don't know enough about China to comment too much on this, but there is some very fascinating dynamics emerging with China siding with Europe, perhaps, or at least not being so pro-Russian as you might expect, and siding with Europe and Ukraine to a degree by critiquing the American response or the American attitude towards Zelensky and the peace negotiations, and not including Ukraine. So, wow, there's some serious 5D chess going on at the moment in global geopolitics. Let me know what you guys think. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.